Today we're going to be talking about distance and midpoints. So how could you find the distance between these 2 points? And think of distance as an absolute value. So an absolute value of the larger point minus the smaller point. Okay, and technically if you do largest minus smallest, you don't need these absolute value signs. I can't remember what our book does, but that's how you would find the distance between P and Q. So larger minus smaller. So use the number line to find QR. Okay, so to find QR, I take the larger minus the smaller, and I get 3. If you look at it, you go 1, 2, 3 units. Now, why did I do that? I wanted to set us up for the distance formula. So I have this X distance I'm going to go through, and I have this Y distance that I'm going to change, and we have a right triangle. So we know that A, B, C, from our Pythagorean theorem, A squared plus B squared equals C squared. This A distance here, well, this point to this point is an X change. So that is X2 minus X1. So I'm going to actually rewrite this a little bit. So our distance to solve for C, we would square root. I just said A was X2 minus X1 plus, now I need this B distance. This B distance is the change in Y. So Y2 minus Y1. So our distance formula is this, and I would make sure you have this written in your notes. D is just standing for distance. X2 minus X1 squared plus Y2 minus Y1 squared, and the square root of that total distance. Find the distance between those 2 points. We're always going to be giving our answers in simplest radical form, and then maybe I'll have us writing this in 2 decimal places. I may not have you guys have a calculator on this question. Okay, so this is X1, Y1. This is X2, Y2. So my distance is the square root of X2 minus X1 plus Y2 minus Y1 squared. So my distance here is the square root of 7 squared plus a negative 2 squared. So I have the square root of 49 plus 4, which is the square root of 53. I don't think there's any perfect squares that go into 53, so we would leave that like that. And that written in 2 decimal places is 7.28. Now midpoint, middle. Average. When you're finding the middle of something, you're finding the average. Well, how do I find the average between 2 things? You take the amount of things you have together, add them together, divide by the amount of things that you have. So X1 plus X2 divided by 2, Y1 plus Y2 divided by 2. So remember, midpoint is a point, so it's going to be in coordinate form, and it's just the average of the x coordinates, average of the y coordinates. Find the coordinate m, the midpoint of GH for those two. So our midpoint is going to be 8 minus 14 over 2, and that ends up being negative 6 over 2, which is a negative 3. The y coordinate is a negative 6 plus a 12 over 2. That's going to be a 6 over 2. That's going to be a 3. So our midpoint, make sure you put it in coordinate form, is that. Okay, in this example, we need to find the coordinates of D if E is the midpoint. So E is the midpoint of DF, and F has coordinates of negative 5, negative 3. So let's talk about this. Remember, we get the midpoint by doing x1 plus x2 over 2. Okay, but now this is my midpoint. So E is the midpoint. So negative 6 is my midpoint of my x coordinate. F is one of my endpoints. I don't know the other point. Divide by 2. Multiply the 2 over. Add the 5 over. We get a negative 7. Now to get the y coordinate, again, you take x1 plus x2 over 2. This y is the midpoint. E is the midpoint. We know one of the coordinates is negative 3. We don't know the other one, so I'm going to name it y. I'm sorry, up here these should be y's. Divide by 2. So I multiply everything by 2 to get an 8 equals a negative 3 plus a y. Add the 3 over, and I get 11. So the other endpoint is negative 7, 11. Okay, on this example, you want to find the measure of PR if Q is the midpoint of PR. Okay, so Q is the midpoint. So I know PQ is equal to QR because a midpoint breaks our segment up into 2 segments. So 14x plus 2 is equal to twice the length of the other segment. I distribute. I add the 6 over. I subtract the 2. So make sure you're answering the question. I need to find the measure of PR. I've just found x. So I need to find the measure of PR. PR is equal to 14x plus 2. So that's 14 times 1/2 plus 2. So that's 7 plus 2, which is 9. Okay. The last definition that we have here is segment bisector, so make sure you have this in your notes. Segment bisector is any segment that is intersects another segment at its midpoint. So we have to look at this diagram here. Which segment or segments are bisectors of PQ? So which segments hit PQ at its midpoint? Well, I know that PM is equal to MQ by these little markings that I have here. So I know M is the midpoint. What segments hit M? Okay, so I have segment JM and I have line KM. Both of those, both that line, both the segment and the line hit at M, which is the midpoint for segment PQ. So that is your distance and midpoint lesson for today. Thank you.